Thanks for tuning in today. It's a little bit later in the day than I usually like to get these videos created and publish them. It's almost about 5 Eastern here in Florida, so just wanted to get a thought out for the end of the day. So thanks for joining. Really wanted to expand on my last video and discuss a little bit more about my kind of views on God and specifically the afterlife and kind of my take on it. Again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form an expert. I have not, haven't died and was like resurrected or anything. I'm not any sort of like guru or, any self-proclaimed prophet or anything like that, or even a prophet or declared by like a higher power. I'm just a man in search of like purpose and meaning and trying to not really understand, but more just come to terms with just being and just see the truth of how the universe works and whatnot, and how things actually work rather than how I wish them to work. So really wanted to share some of these ideas, some of the literature that I've read, specifically the authors and whatnot, and kind of some recommendations if you're interested in kind of expanding your realm of knowledge and kind of do an inquiry into this kind of space. There's all sorts of stuff. I'm a huge fan of Alan Watts. I think he's fantastic. He can be a little bit, his writing can be a little bit verbose and complicated, but if you take it slow and read through it and really digest the information, you'll pick up on really the themes of what he's talking about. I'm currently reading a book by him. I wish I had it with me. I don't. I have to get it from the other room. I'll do an actual full review on this, but I just wanted to mention the book I'm reading. It's called Man, Woman, and Nature by Alan Watts, and it really discusses the relationships between men and mankind, their search for meaning and the relations to nature and kind of the world around us, and how, in essence, we quantify things and create labels for things so that we can understand the world around us. That's kind of inherent nature of like consciousness, of conscious and logic within the realm of like identifying. I actually had a conversation earlier today. It was kind of funny how it's interesting. The brain, our brains named the brain, which is pretty funny. So in essence, I interpret that as we really identify things however we want to identify them. Perception is ultimately reality for people. It doesn't necessarily mean the reality is correct, but perception, how people perceive the world, is how their reality is presented to them. So I wanted to kind of dive into my thoughts on really God, and then also I wanted to dive a little bit into the afterlife and kind of discuss like what happens or what I believe and think from my synthesis of data and research from the Bible to different spiritual teachers to just actually doing some meditations and really thinking on this and incorporating all of this kind of together and synthesizing it ultimately to my kind of belief system, and not adjusting it to fit my needs or anything, but kind of understanding that there's a piece of the puzzle in all these different avenues, yet none of them I believe really have the full puzzle. So kind of piecing things together, and of course this isn't perfect, there will be things missing, but so first off, and this is something that these common themes, I don't really see God as in essence this floating dude in the sky like a lot of Christian faiths and the Islamic faith and even the Jewish faith. It's part of it, especially in the Holy Bible, the New Testament. It talks about how God is within all of us, and I'll get into that in a second and why I believe that's a way more accurate representation. I don't necessarily believe in the traditional concept of heaven or hell. I don't think like when we die we go to an eternity in heaven or an eternity in hell. That's I actually am more of aligned with the concept of Buddhism and Hinduism, and that we reincarnate in essence to continually learn new lessons while we're here. And by here I mean just in a physical plane of existence, not in like this infinite eternal space that is beyond any time, and it's like It's like the space. It's like if anybody played God of War, it's almost like the realm between realms. That's almost in my mind the area that God would inhabit, and I find that interesting because that means he's literally in everything. Because we're all made of atoms we're all made of atoms, which atoms are made of, protons, neutrons, those you can go even further down into quarks and just get smaller and smaller. But ultimately, all this boils down to is everything's made of energy. So when you have people, it's funny because you have actual these spiritual gurus, and people are like, we're all made of energy, and then you get other people that give them all this flack about it, and it's the funniest thing. I'm like, it's like, oh, the most energy vibration and so it's like, oh, that's nonsense. It's made up. And I'm like, I mean, technically, it's probably it's actually very accurate. It's very simplistic how they define it, but on a physics standpoint, and when you talk about quantum physics, yes, we are all technically made of energy because we're all made of atoms, and atoms are made of energy. So, ironically, the funny part is these atoms, in essence, between these protons, the proton is the, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's a proton-neutron core, and then the electrons basically float around it. I honestly haven't taken physics since high school. It was senior year AP physics. I'm pretty sure, you can correct me, leave a comment if you actually know anything about, the basics of quantum physics, or at least, how proton-neutron works and electrons. My understanding is you got a proton-neutron core, and then you have the electrons kind of surrounding it. There's other variations of that stuff. But basically, you have all this empty space between these protons and neutrons. And my understanding is in the Bible, and you have all of these different literatures, literally saying, God is within us. And I'm like, well, let's maybe take this even from a logical standpoint, and I believe that I believe a God's world is omnipotent, omniscient being. I don't think he bases his world around the logic of man. He has his own logic that's completely undefinable to us. But basically, I believe God inhabits the space between space. So he literally is in all of us because he inhabits the space between space. So in representation, if you want to talk about logic of that, he inhabits the space between our protons and or between the electrons. He inhabits the space between atoms. He literally is a part of our being because he inhabits the parts that we are not, which is if this body, this physical form, the computer in front of me, the screens in front of me, this phone, this cup, all of it technically has empty space. And it's interesting because Alan Watts actually makes a great point, and I loved it. Basically, he talked about how you have the outside and then the inside. And the funny part is that it's for example, if I open, it's the inside of this cup. It's that's the inside of this cup. And it's but it's not really the inside of the cup. It's just another outside that's inside, if that makes sense. So it's yes, in our perception, I've opened the cup, I'm looking at the inside of the cup, but in reality, the inside of this is unquantifiable. We could never, get to the point where we're at the physical inside of this. The only way that would probably be possible is if we split an atom, but even then, you're technically not the inside of it because you can break down an atom to even its parts. So I find that very fascinating. Again, I'm not 100% certain that's accurate, but that really would be my interpretation of kind of looking at all these different doctrines, all these different spiritual teachers, writers, and these just the reading that I've done, the research that I've done, and kind of come to the conclusion that when God is, I truly believe, literally in everything, and by that I truly believe he inhabits the space between space, and that's kind of cool because that means everywhere you go, it's like a reflection of God that you're looking at, and you're never really alone because you always have his presence within you. But that from that I kind of wanted to bring that back to the concept of why we are ultimately here, what's kind of the purpose. And I wanted to mention another thing from Alan Watts, and I'm going to make a reference to the Yggdrasil tree, and I'm also going to talk about the Bible and a little bit. So first, Alan Watts was basically talking about, in essence, so if you think God is a space between space, or if God is kind of the unifying force, he's in everything, almost view it like a tree. So you have this gorgeous giant tree. It has all these beautiful fruit on it. So if God's the tree, you have this tree that's like, in essence, not in essence, it is eternal. So I mean, it will never die because it's existed, always will exist, and always it's been around before the dawn of time because it exists beyond time. So you have this tree, and that's in essence God. And you have the fruit here, and these fruit, they eventually fall off from the tree. Now it's interesting because Alan Watts said, if God's the tree, everything else is the fruit. And the reason is because the fruit is temporal, it's temporary. It will eventually either be eaten, it'll die, it'll rot away. But the fun part is about that, when that happens, it's going to eventually somehow be reintroduced back into the tree, and we can give the metaphor of like the life cycle of how it's like decomposition back into the tree's roots. But basically it's like, yes, the apple might die, but it's still going to go back into that tree eventually and be reincorporated back into that source and then bear more fruit. And it's kind of cool, and I like that analogy because that really can kind of back the concept of reincarnation, of like you're this part of this bounty that exists temporarily. You learn things while you're here. You have these experiences so that you can your fragment of that tree can grow, so that when you go back to the tree, you're just bringing more back to yourself in essence, or back to God, and you reincarnate again to have a new experience and learn new things. And another great example is, and I'm going to use God of War here. I love God of War, the God of War Ragnarok, the 2018 series, not the original one, because this is Norse mythology is the tree of life, or Yggdrasil, which is another perfect analogy of this. Basically, in the game, they explain that Yggdrasil is in essence woven into the fabric of everything. It is literally like, it's like the space between space. It's like always, it's here. It's like it's almost always existed because it's beyond like the realms. So the fun part is, I like about this analogy is that you have this tree, and if the tree is in essence God, we're fragments of this tree, and we are again temporary, but we always will go back. So that's another analogy I wanted to mention. The last one, and this is actually directly from the Bible. Jesus actually mentions that in the Bible, he compares God to, in essence, the vine, and humans or people are the branch. So again, we all stem from something. We all stem from one thing. We're just a different branch of that vine or of that tree. So that's the concept of, and this goes back to Buddhism and Taoism, a lot of these religions, where it's like it believes in the concept of oneness, like we all are like in essence one entity, one thing. So it's interesting. I find that very interesting because I truly believe like, and it's like the concept of like, oh, we're all brothers and sisters under Christ. No, I'm like, I literally don't mean like we're all biological brothers and sisters or anything, but like we all come from the same source. We are all a part of the same eternal, infinite being. It's just, in essence, we are experiencing ourselves through other people and other means. By it's like you're in essence almost seeing like a mirror of yourself, just, or an aspect of yourself. When you meet new people, have new experiences, you're in new environments. It's like your internal state is being projected externally. So how you are, how your mind, soul, whatever you want to call it is, that's the world that's going to be projected to you. Now, it's fun though, because the great part about that is knowing that, yes, this body is temporary, and it is temporary for everyone. Anybody that says, immortality honestly would be a curse. Like being stuck in the same body forever, not being able to experience, it's not even experience the release of death, just having this body, this form finally pass to where the part of you that is immortal can move on to the next journey or path or whatever. That's there's some beauty in that, because if you think about it, once you let go of that need and to attach to yourself to this body and to this form, and let go of the fear of actually dying, you can do so much, because now you know that it's like, yes, like I have this form, God provided me with this form, and I can use this form and utilize it for either your own purposes or ultimately what the universe wants you to use it is for the betterment of, honestly, like, when I say the world, I mean like the eternal being of the world, the universal unconsciousness, rather than for your own nefarious, selfish needs. Not every selfish need is nefarious. It's funny how usually when your purpose, when you understand and can finally kind of figure your purpose, it actually typically does align with something internally that you would clarify, you would define as selfish, but sometimes pursuing kind of some selfish means can actually lead you to your purpose. But basically, once you have that weight lift off your shoulders of knowing that, yes, this form is mortal, but I am immortal, and I literally mean I am immortal, because I am, that is not this body. I am is who you are. It's just, we can't really define words to it. It's not your brain. It's not your mind. You're not your mind. It's something beyond that. You are, in essence, like, you are the life force that inhabits this body, and you share that with God. And because you are from Him, you are in essence one and the same thing. You're just ultimately the imperfect form of Him, because you decided to come here to learn lessons, because you recognize that you are trying to get to this state of what would be called perfection, because in the state of paradise, or like whatever you want to call it, the realm between realms where God resides, there's not the concepts of forgiveness and hate and anger and all these human notions that we know. I mentioned forgiveness first because there's no hate, anger, pain, suffering there, so there's no need for forgiveness. It's just a constant level of peace and love, because that is really what that's what I truly think and believe. The whole point of the universe. I at one point, for the longest time, honestly, like, fought against that flow, because I was just so angry with the world, and not just with the world, just like literally with God. I was just really pissed off. I mean, I was like, every opportunity or thing that He wanted me to do, I basically rejected most of it, because I was just sick of it. And there are reasons. I was very, 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 very angry when my mother passed when I was younger. That caused a lot of trauma and a lot of growth, ultimately, but kind of understanding eventually that, like, God is not putting you on a path that He doesn't think you can handle. And there will be challenges, but that's where the most growth is with challenges. So once you can kind of view that, and again, I'm not preaching to you to go find religion or find spirituality or anything. I'm just giving you my take and my experience on it, and what I've seen, and kind of all the research and works done in the space of spirituality, and specifically God and a higher power. And it's funny how all religions basically agree on the same exact principle, that there is this essence of basically a God that is in all of us and connected to everything. It's just the way that they go about presenting the historical events, that they talk about how God views the world and how it views people, what God is kind of looking for, things like that. That's where they disagree, and I find it really funny. I think I mentioned this in my last video, how you have all these religions that separate kind of people out into these labels and categories, but ultimately, like, that's not at all what God wants. It's like, all He wants is for all of His children to, like, live harmoniously and live like one, because ultimately that's what we're made to do. And I don't mean like some weird Borg Star Trek collective thing where it's like we're all one mind. No, I don't mean like that. I mean as in you have the free will, but you also have harmony within that free will, because that's what makes it fun living here. It's like being able to actually make a choice, and then your choices, we experience them as we experience our choices as having consequences. But it's kind of cool because that's one of the unique things about that God gave us, is the ability to have free will and make our own decisions. But it's funny, He's not going to tell us what to do, but He will nudge us in the right direction and be like, hey, maybe this is something you should look at. And it's up to you to, ultimately decide to walk down that path or take that journey. But, some people decide that they're not ready for it, or they just don't realize they're ready for it. And what I'm telling you, if you're coming to this video, you're ready. You are, I truly believe, ready to accept some form of spiritual practice. And I highly recommend, this is the one thing I will say, and I don't want to say I'm preaching, but I'll preach a little bit, just a tiny little bit. If you're interested in things like spirituality and religion, maybe, go check out a couple churches. I'm not the biggest proponent of church. I think it has some benefits. I think it's a great benefit for community. But I also am like, go read some books. Like, find some different authors. Alan Watts is a great example. I think it's Ernest Nightingale's another one. He's really good. I'm trying to think of some other folks. Obviously, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. Any Buddhist literature is fantastic. Book of the Dead's fantastic. Taoist literature is great too. I'll definitely do a series on some books, or not a series, I'll do a video on some books that I would recommend if you're trying to dive into the spiritual space a little bit and give kind of an introductory on maybe like the 5 books I would start with, because they kind of open your mind to expanding into other literature that's maybe a little bit more in-depth and a little bit like deeper down the rabbit holes, or the better way to put it. But that's really all I have for you today. Thanks for joining. Again, like, I truly believe we're all in this together. We just need to understand that really when you're ultimately hurting someone else, you're hurting yourself. It's just we externalize it because it's like we see it as external, but ultimately it's like you are internally hurting yourself even though you don't realize that in the moment. But again, thanks for joining. If you liked the video, I'd love if you left a like or leave a comment. I'd love to hear some views. I would challenge you to maybe leave how you perceive God and spirituality. I think that would be really interesting. I'd love to strike up a dialogue. If you're interested in this channel, and subscribe, that'd be great as well. I'd be really appreciative of that. Help our channel grow. Otherwise, have a great day, and I will see you when I see you.